My husband used to say a family is like a tree: strong roots, branches that stretch toward the sun, shelter for everyone beneath it. I believed him. I lived for that tree. But on one cold November night, sitting at the head of my son's dinner table, I heard a whisper. A whisper that poisoned the roots and made the branches snap. And what I discovered after that night changed everything. When my George died, my world cracked in half. We'd been married 47 years. 47 years of cooking side by side, raising children, fighting, forgiving, and dreaming. And then suddenly, silence. The kind of silence that swallows your bones. I told myself I would not crumble. George would never forgive me if I just gave up. I sold our little brick house, the one he and I had poured our sweat into, and moved in with our son David and his wife Rachel. I thought it was the right choice. Family, after all, is supposed to keep you warm when life turns cold. David welcomed me at first. "Don't worry, Mom," he said, hugging me so tight I nearly couldn't breathe. "This is your home now." His words soothed the ache in my chest. Rachel even smiled, kissed my cheek, and said, "We're glad you're here." For a moment I believed them. The house was bigger, newer, brighter than mine ever was. White walls, shiny hardwood floors, the smell of lavender candles drifting down the hallway. I set my suitcase in the guest room, tucked George's old wristwatch in the drawer, and whispered, "We'll be all right." At first, life was almost sweet. I cooked dinners, I folded laundry, I told stories to the grandchildren while tucking them into bed. They loved hearing about how their grandfather once painted the nursery blue and ended up with streaks in his hair. Their laughter felt like sunlight on my face. But small cracks appeared quickly. I tried to ignore them, but cracks have a way of spreading. Rachel had a way of looking at me that made me feel like dust on her polished floors. One evening, as I set a casserole on the table, she smirked and said, "Oh, Mom, you didn't need to go through the trouble. We usually eat lighter." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes were sharp. My hands trembled as I passed the serving spoon. Another day, I folded a basket of laundry, hers and David's shirts neatly stacked. She came in, eyebrows raised, and said, "Oh, you don't have to worry about our things. We like them folded a certain way." Her voice dripped sugar, but I felt the sting underneath. David. He didn't notice. Or maybe he chose not to. He was always busy with work, tired by the time he got home. He kissed Rachel on the cheek, ruffled the kids' hair, and sat at the head of the table like a king returning to his throne. I sat quietly, invisible at the far end. Still, I told myself it was fine. I didn't need attention. I only needed to be useful. So I scrubbed, swept, cooked, and tried to make myself smaller. That's what mothers do, isn't it? Sacrifice. There were good moments too. Movie nights with the children, hot cocoa on snowy mornings, the sound of David's laugh that reminded me of George in our younger days. Those moments stitched me together. Thread by fragile thread, but Rachel, she had a way of pulling at those stitches until I unraveled. Once I overheard her talking on the phone. "It's exhausting having her here all the time," she said, her voice muffled through the kitchen wall. "I can't even breathe in my own home." My chest tightened. I stood frozen, clutching the dish rag in my hand. I wasn't supposed to hear it. But I did. I wanted to tell David, but what would I say? That his wife didn't want me there? That I felt like an intruder in the home I helped them buy when I sold mine? No. I bit my tongue and swallowed the ache. Holidays came. Thanksgiving. I roasted a turkey, seasoned the stuffing, mashed the potatoes the way George liked them. Family gathered. Laughter rang through the dining room. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined all the cracks. Maybe Rachel had been tired. Maybe I was too sensitive. But then, that whisper. Rachel leaned into David's ear, her lips moving slow, deliberate. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his smile vanished. He looked at me with something I'd never seen before. Not love, not warmth, something colder, something that made me shiver. The children laughed. Glasses clinked, but all I could hear was the silence that followed that whisper. My fork slipped from my hand and clattered against the plate. I told myself it was nothing, just a private joke. But deep down, I knew. That whisper was the beginning of something cruel. I didn't know it yet. I couldn't imagine how far Rachel would go. But what I discovered after that dinner, what I uncovered in the weeks that followed, changed everything. After that night, nothing felt the same. The whisper had planted something in my son's heart, and I could see it grow like a shadow. David stopped looking me in the eye. When he spoke, his words were clipped, mechanical. "Can you keep the kids quiet? I need rest." Or, "Don't cook so much, Mom, it's wasteful." Rachel no longer bothered to hide her disdain. It showed in every sigh, every raised brow, every whispered conversation that ended the moment I entered the room. One morning, I came downstairs to find them both at the kitchen table, coffee mugs in hand. Their voices hushed the second they saw me. David cleared his throat and muttered, "Morning." Rachel smiled thinly, then leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. "You know, Mom," she said slowly, "we've been thinking, maybe it's time you considered other options. A place where you'd have people your own age, more activities, less stress." Her words struck like ice. I stared at her, then at David. My son, my boy. He didn't defend me. He didn't say no. He just sat there, eyes downcast, as if ashamed to look at me. "I'm not a burden," I whispered, more to myself than to them. Rachel tilted her head, pity dripping from her smile. "Of course not. We just want what's best for everyone." Everyone, everyone but me. The cracks widened into canyons. At dinner, Rachel began making little comments in front of the children. "Careful, kids. Grandma's memory isn't what it used to be." Or, "Let's not tire Grandma out. She needs her rest." Her tone was playful, but I saw the way the children's eyes flickered with confusion, then pity. David laughed along. He laughed, and I sat there, forcing a smile, my insides twisting. One evening, I overheard them again. I hadn't meant to. I was folding laundry in the hallway when their voices drifted from the living room. "She has to go," Rachel hissed. "I can't keep doing this. She's in our space, in our lives, every second. I'm suffocating." David's voice low and tired. "It's complicated. She sold her house to help us. Where's she supposed to go?" Rachel's reply was sharp. "That was her choice. We didn't force her. And honestly, she'll survive. There are plenty of homes." I pressed the fabric to my chest, breath caught in my throat. Homes. She wanted to send me away. That night, when David came upstairs, I tried to talk to him. "Do you really think I don't belong here?" My voice was trembling, begging. He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Mom, don't make this harder. Rachel and I, we need space. You're always here. It's not like before." Not like before. My heart shattered. He was no longer my boy, the one who used to run into my arms with scraped knees, crying for comfort. He was a man, cold and distant, listening more to his wife's whispers than to the voice of his own mother. The children noticed the shift too. They grew quieter around me. They stopped asking me to read bedtime stories. Sometimes I'd hear Rachel tell them, "Grandma's tired, don't bother her." Lies. I wasn't tired. I was desperate for their laughter, their warmth. Then came the cruelest moment of all. It was Christmas Eve. Snowflakes tapped the windows, the trees sparkled with lights, and I tried to cling to the magic of family. I baked pies, set the table, hummed carols to drown the ache in my chest. But when we sat down, Rachel leaned across the table, smiling too sweetly, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "You know, kids, after New Year's, Grandma's going on a little trip. She'll be moving into a nice place with people her age." The words hung in the air like smoke. The children gasped. One of them asked, "Grandma, is it true?" I froze. My throat closed. My eyes darted to David. He didn't deny it. He just shifted uncomfortably, staring at his plate. I swallowed hard and forced a smile. "We'll see, sweetheart." My voice cracked, but I held it together. For them. Only for them. Later that night, I hid in my room, clutching George's old watch to my chest. I whispered to him in the dark, "They're taking everything from me, my home, my dignity, even the children's love." My tears soaked the pillow. The days that followed blurred into a haze of humiliation. Rachel began packing some of my things without even asking. Boxes appeared in the hallway. "Just getting a head start," she chirped, as if she were doing me a favor. David avoided me altogether. The little boy I raised was gone, replaced by a man who couldn't even look his mother in the eyes. At church, Rachel spread her poison. I caught the looks, the pitying glances. A woman leaned in and whispered, "It must be hard, dear, not being able to manage on your own anymore." I wanted to scream, "That's not true. I can manage. I've taken care of myself my whole life." But I swallowed it as I always did. The walls closed in. Each day, I felt myself shrinking. I moved quieter, spoke less, tried to disappear in my own son's home. But it didn't matter. Rachel had already written me out of the story. Then one night, I walked past their bedroom door and froze. Rachel's voice again, low, deliberate. "By spring, she'll be gone. I've already spoken to the director at the facility. It's perfect. She won't have a choice." David's reply was a whisper, hesitant. "She'll be furious." Rachel's laugh cut through the air. "Let her. What can she do? She's old, helpless. She has nothing." Nothing. I stumbled back, hand over my mouth, heart pounding. Old, helpless, nothing. That was the moment it sank in. They weren't just pushing me out, they were erasing me. And for the first time in my life, I realized maybe they were right. Maybe I really did have nothing. But deep inside, beneath the humiliation, beneath the despair, something flickered. A spark, small but alive, because I still had one thing they didn't know about. And what I found when I reached for it changed everything. I sat on the edge of my bed, surrounded by half-packed boxes. Each cardboard square felt like a coffin for my memories. My hands trembled as I picked up George's old flannel shirt, pressing it to my face, breathing in the faint scent that still clung to it. "George," I whispered. "What do I do now? They've taken everything. They want to throw me away like trash." Tears blurred my vision. My chest ached with the kind of pain no doctor can fix. I felt small, powerless, erased. That night, I barely slept. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the sound of Rachel's heels clicking down the hallway, the low hum of her laughter through the walls. Every sound was a reminder. This wasn't my home anymore. By morning, I felt hollow. I began digging through my suitcase, searching for something to distract myself. That's when my fingers brushed against cold metal. A small, locked box. One George had given me years ago with a smile that said, "You'll know when to open it." I had tucked it away after his funeral, too broken to face it. But now my hands shook as I pulled it out, the key still taped to the bottom. Inside were documents, faded papers neatly folded, bank statements, deeds, notes in George's handwriting. My breath caught as I scanned the pages, and then I saw it, proof that the money from the sale of our house hadn't just disappeared into David's mortgage. George had arranged it carefully. Half of that money in my name was invested. Bonds, accounts, enough to give me independence, enough to buy my own place if I chose. I sat there frozen, the papers spread across my lap like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. I wasn't helpless. I wasn't nothing. George had known. He'd known I might need this someday. He'd known Rachel's charm was just a mask. My husband, even in death, had left me a lifeline. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of strength. My tears dried, my back straightened, my hands stopped trembling. I whispered to the empty room, "You were wrong, Rachel. I am not helpless, and you're about to find out just how wrong you were." Over the next days, I became a shadow in my own house, but not out of weakness, out of strategy. I watched them, listened, took notes. Rachel on the phone bragging to a friend, "By Easter, she'll be gone." David signing forms without reading them, trusting her every word. I kept a small notebook hidden in my nightstand. Every insult, every whispered scheme, every cruel laugh, I wrote it down. Piece by piece, I built a map of their betrayal. One afternoon, when Rachel wasn't home, I slipped into the study. David's laptop was open. I knew I shouldn't, but I couldn't stop myself. Emails, plans, conversations about transitioning mom to assisted living, a contract half drafted with the facility director. My stomach twisted, but I copied it all, quietly, carefully. That night, I sat by the window, papers and notes spread out before me. My heart raced, not with fear anymore, but with something sharper. Resolve. George's words echoed in my memory. Never let anyone erase you. Margaret. Not even family. I realized then I wasn't just going to survive. I was going to fight back, but I couldn't storm into the dining room and throw the papers in their faces. That would be foolish. No, if Rachel had taught me anything, it was the power of patience, of whispers, of playing the long game. So I smiled more. Quieter, smaller, but enough to throw her off guard. I let Rachel believe I was shrinking further into myself. I let David think I was resigned. I let them keep packing my boxes, keep planning their little betrayal, because all the while, I was planning mine. I met with an old friend from church, one who happened to be a retired attorney. Over coffee in the corner of a quiet cafe, I slid the documents across the table. His eyes widened. Margaret, this gives you more leverage than they realize. They can't touch you. In fact, you could— Not yet, I whispered. Not until the time is right. He nodded slowly, understanding. Each day that followed, I felt stronger. Less like prey, more like a hunter waiting in the tall grass. The humiliation still burned, the betrayal still cut deep, but now I carried something sharper than pain, a plan. And the moment to strike was coming, I could feel it. Because Rachel thought she had won, she thought I was broken, ready to vanish quietly. But soon, she would learn the truth. I wasn't going anywhere. And when I revealed what I had been holding all along, her world would come crashing down. They thought the truth would be buried with my silence. They thought whispers could rewrite a lifetime. They were wrong. I began quietly. The lawyer I'd met with drew up the papers. George's accounts, the deeds, the bonds. Everything was in order. I filed the small claims and the notice that froze any transfer of property. It was dry and legal and final in a way Rachel hadn't expected. I watched the mail that week like a hawk. When the notice arrived on their kitchen table that Saturday, I was sitting at the window pretending to read the paper. I watched David's shoulders slump as he read. I watched Rachel's smile fade into something sharp and ugly. She tried to act casual. "Must be a mistake," she said, voice too loud, bright as a broken light. She told their friends it was merely paperwork. She told the children it was a grown-up thing. But behind the polite mask, panic leaked. Anger leaked. She started picking fights. Small ones at first. Complaints about where I left my teacup, jabs at my cooking. Each little barb was designed to provoke, to make me appear unstable, to make me seem, yet again, unfit. I let them play their parts. I kept a calm face. I let the community see the version Rachel wanted them to see. Beneath that calm, I was assembling one last piece. Months earlier, in a fit of love and foolishness, I had pressed the record button on my little voice recorder. I hadn't planned a trap. I had wanted evidence, proof for myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I had recorded the whispering, not just the tiny aside at dinner, but the plotting in the living room. Rachel's voice, cruel, confident, petty, was there. She spoke of getting rid of me. She joked about freedom and starting over without an old woman in the house. Her laughter after those lines was the sound of someone who believed she'd won. That recording became my scalpel. I arranged a small family gathering, just to settle things, I told them, with relatives I knew were close and honest. I invited the church ladies, too. I invited the retired attorney who had helped me. I cooked a modest dinner and set the table exactly as I always had. I put George's faded napkin in the center, a quiet reminder of the life that had been trampled. Midway through the meal, when Rachel was leaning back with that smug, practiced smile, I said, "I want to say something." My voice was light, too light, perfectly ordinary. Everyone looked up out of habit. David's face was guarded. Rachel's eyes narrowed. I pressed play. Her voice filled the room, clear, cruel, unmasked. The way she said she'll be gone by spring made people's mouths fall open. I watched Cousin Linda's fingers go white on her fork. I watched the church ladies exchange looks that said what none of us wanted to say aloud. I watched the kids scramble to their chairs, their confusion plain on their faces. When the recording ended, the silence that followed was sharp as glass. Rachel's smile died right there. For the first time in months, she had no ready laugh, no measured apology. She was exposed, naked in a way the polished woman she played every day had never been. David's face crumbled. I didn't want him to collapse like that. He was still my son, but truth has a way of doing what kindness sometimes cannot. He stood up, voice cracking, and asked, "Rachel, why? Why would you—" He couldn't finish. He looked at her like a man who had been led blindfolded into a terrible joke. Neighbors whispered. The pastor's wife called me the next day, first to ask if I was all right, then to tell me she'd heard everything and that people were talking. Not the quiet, pitying talk Rachel had wanted. This was a different breed of talk. It was astonishment, outrage. People started piecing things together. The story traveled faster than my anger did. Rachel lashed out. She tried to spin it, to claim the recording was taken out of context. She cried in front of the kids, little, strategic sobs. She accused me of betrayal. She accused me of trying to ruin a family. Some friends took her side at first. Emotions are messy. But when evidence sits in the light, it doesn't stay messy for long. Legally, the freeze on the house meant she and David couldn't force me out. Economically, the investments George had hidden were now mine to claim. I used that money not to humiliate them, but to buy back my dignity. I rented a small house down the street, cozy, sunlit, with a creaky porch where I could sit and watch the neighborhood like an old queen. I told the children first. I invited them over for cookies and teas. I told them stories of their grandfather, of the paint on his hands, of the way he used to whistle in the garage. They listened, wide-eyed, and for the first time in months, their arms found their way back to me without prompting. They chose me. David came around slowly, ashamed, penitent. He apologized in waves, some genuine, some clumsy. I let him, but I made it clear forgiveness would be measured. Trust had to be rebuilt. I would not be swept back into a life where whispers decided my worth. And Rachel, the whispers that once served her became the whispers that followed her? The church ladies avoided her at bake sales. The PTA meetings grew chilly. People who had once admired her carefully kept their distance. She had spent years crafting an image, polished, efficient, indispensable. The recording cracked that image like a stone dropped into glass. It didn't have to be violent to be devastating. Reputation is currency. She spent hers. There was one small moment that tasted like something of justice. She stood in the grocery aisle one afternoon, phone pressed to her ear, trying to call a friend. The woman on the other end recognized her voice and hung up. Rachel's face went utterly pale. No one needs scandal, but being quietly ostracized is worse. It's a slow, steady erosion, and she felt every grain of it. I will not say I felt nothing. I had a rush of triumph, yes, but it was tempered by sorrow. Revenge, even when fair, leaves its marks. I did not dance on the ruins of their marriage. I did not gloat in a way that would make me small. Instead, I reclaimed my life in quiet, stubborn ways, gardening in the morning light, making jam for neighbors, reading to grandchildren who now came willingly to my lap. Still, there was a final thing I chose to do. I confronted David, not to shame him, but to make him understand the cost of listening to poison. He listened, he cried, he promised to be better. I believed him enough to let him visit, but I also left him with a choice. He could rebuild his home with the woman he chose, but he would not erase the woman who had raised him. As I closed that chapter, I felt something settle deep inside me. Not victory in the way the movies show, no triumphant music or banners. This was quieter, deeper, a sense that I had been seen, heard, respected. They had tried to erase me with whispers. I answered with truth, and that truth changed everything. The house feels different now, quiet but not lonely. The clock ticks in the hallway, the kettle whistles in the kitchen. I sit on my porch each evening with a blanket on my knees, and for the first time in a long while, I feel the air isn't heavy. It's light, fresh, like a burden has finally lifted. Rachel no longer dares to meet my eyes when we cross paths in town. Her shoulders hunch, her smile is forced, her words clipped and empty. She knows the truth is out there. She knows people have heard. And every whisper now is about her, not me. David comes to see me more often. At first it was awkward. His guilt hung between us like a storm cloud. But over time, he started bringing little things, a bag of groceries, a plant from my porch. One afternoon, he simply sat down beside me and whispered, "I should have protected you." His voice cracked, and I could feel the weight of regret in him. I didn't need to say much. Sometimes silence says everything. The grandchildren laugh in my kitchen again. Their drawings hang on my fridge. They know my stories now, the real ones. About their grandfather, about the love and sweat that built the home their father grew up in. They no longer look at me with doubt or distance. They call me Grandma again, and each time they run to hug me, I know I chose the right kind of revenge. Not cruel, not bitter, but truthful, sharp, and lasting. Neighbors stop by with pies, with gossip, with kindness. They treat me not as a burden, not as someone fading into the edges, but as a woman who survived, who stood tall when others tried to push her down. Respect. It feels different when you've fought to reclaim it. Sometimes, late at night, I think back to that dinner table, to Rachel leaning in close, whispering words she thought would stay hidden. She'll be gone by spring. That cruelty nearly broke me. But it also lit the fire that carried me here. I was supposed to disappear. Instead, I became louder than her lies, stronger than her whispers. And if there's one lesson I've learned, it's this. Betrayal can cut deep, but truth can cut deeper. They tried to bury me in silence. I answered with proof, with courage, with patience. And in the end, that was the day she realized she'd lost everything, not because I destroyed her, but because she destroyed herself. Now, when I sip my tea in the morning light, I don't feel like a victim. I feel like a survivor. And I know this. Whispers fade, but truth, it echoes forever.